Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles podcast. I'm Emily Bennington with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are going to talk about anger. Anger is an issue that obviously affects all of us all throughout our lives. It affects every aspect of our relationships. It affects who we want to be around and who we don't. It affects the kind of home that we grew up in and the kind of home that we give our children. And obviously, as we're seeing now, anger can determine what kind of world that we live in. When we can't resolve our differences peacefully, we tend to resolve them forcefully, which creates a tremendous amount of suffering for so many around the world. And so obviously, as a result of this, the Course is very interested in helping us address our anger. The Course mentions anger more than 100 times, and it has specific practices for pulling us out of our anger, all of which Robert and I shared in a workshop that we hosted recently called Freedom from Anger. That workshop in its entirety is in the Circle's bookstore. You can find it at circleofa.org. under shop. We enjoyed that workshop so much that we enjoyed the workshop, and we're so steeped in the material that we thought that we would host a podcast on this topic, because it's one of those course concepts that is not only original and brilliant, but it's also really sticking with us. Robert and I are determined not to get angry. We have had various degrees of success with that, but the intention is certainly there.
We've had a lot of success.
You know what? I know. I feel like I'm being a little too casual with it. We have had tremendous amount of success. We'll stop and say, you know what? Madness is madness. We're not going to get angry, and it does seem to have a real effect.
Yeah.
So, Robert, is there anything that you want to say about anger before we get started?
Not really, no. Well,
Okay, because we're going to cover
all kinds
it
of
all.
things.
Yeah, okay. Well, what we tend to do with these things is offer some conventional view of the topic. And with anger, I guess the main thing to know is that the dictionary defines it as an intense emotional state induced by displeasure. Anger can arise in us when we consider something to be unfair or mean or shameful, and it causes in us a desire or an intent to punish or get revenge. So from a conventional view, anger is a reaction to a cause that creates in us a very intense emotional response. We get angry when things don't go our way, and we get angry when we feel like things are outside of our control. And that's obviously relevant right now because so much doesn't go our way in life, and certainly right now so much is outside of our control.
Yeah, I think one of the main things in the air about anger is that it feels like wise and progressive and cutting edge to acknowledge that there is some kind of fundamental validity there, that you shouldn't, you should be authentic, you shouldn't stuff it down, you should recognize that if evolution outfitted us with this emotion, there must be some adaptive purpose that helps us survive and propagate. And so there's a lot of kind of tempered affirmation of anger in the air. And it feels like, yeah, that's got to be healthier than just saying it's wrong and stuffing it down.
Yeah, and we're also taught that anger is just in us. It's something that we're born with, it's innate, it's there for our survival. I had a therapist who told me that anger is the energy of change. And there's something that sounds really cool about that, right?
Yeah.
Like, ooh, the energy of change. So I can harness my anger and I can make things change. I can force the situation back into my sphere of control. And anger does work that way. It like one example is when you get angry with your kids, you can use anger to force their behavior into your control. But then what happens when you lose control of the anger and it takes over you? And so I think from a conventional view, what we consider anger to be a good thing. It can harness the energy of change, but at the same time, we're afraid of it because it does get out of control and take over sometimes.
Well, it's more than it getting out of control. I mean, if you had a cattle prod, you could get a lot of results in terms of your children's behavior, right? But even if the cattle prod
I'm not
never gets out of,
sure. Even with my kids, I'm not even sure
okay,
cattle prod would work.
well, even if the cattle prod never gets out of control, what's the cost of using that tool to get things to go your way?
Right, right. And so what we do is we tend to kind of stuff our anger. We pretend like it's not there, or we pretend like it doesn't have the effect on us that it actually does. And you and I in the workshop, we were trying to get participants to be in touch with the anger that's within all of us, because what we've seen in regards to like spiritual students especially is, I'm too spiritual to be angry, I don't have this problem, everything's fine, we're all one.
Mm-hmm.
But that you had created a list of um, reasons why, or clues to why we're angrier than we may think, all of which were drawn from the course. So do you want to read some of those for us?
Yeah, so they were just signs that you're angrier than you think. And there's 11 of them. Do you want to like share the list perhaps? Like I read one, you read one?
Yeah, I don't want to share the
Okay.
list, but we
I
can
mean,
just
like in terms of
alternate.
that's what I meant, like
Yeah.
share it between us.
Oh, you mean like share, like not share a screen? Because I was like,
Yeah,
this is a podcast, Robert, and
yeah, yeah.
no one's seeing screen.
I get
So
that.
go ahead.
Okay. So, and these, as you said, they're all rooted in specific passages from the course. Number one, you experience slight twinges of annoyance, which the course says are nothing but a veil drawn over intense fury.
You don't like certain people.
You have people you'd rather not run into while you're out in public, which the course says is a form of anger.
There is someone in your life whom you're trying to overlook.
You have a friend whom you see as difficult at times or hard to please, demanding, irritating, or untrue to the ideal he should accept as his according to the role you set for him. All that anger.
This one is a biggie. It's where you are angry at some specific trait in someone, but you're not angry, or at least you don't feel angry at that person across the board.
And the lesson that's drawn from is implying your anger is not limited to that trait. It is across the board. Okay, you have wanted people in your life to feel appropriate guilt for what they did to you. Also anger.
Who cannot relate to that?
Yeah.
You have hoped that people would become aware of your anxiety, sickness, hurt, or depression is due to their actions.
And who hasn't felt that? We want people to know that what we're going through is because of them. You have expected people to reciprocate once you have given them something. There's a whole teaching about how that too is anger. You're angry at having to give up that thing that you gave and not getting basically paid back for it.
There is someone in your life who has failed to fulfill the function that you have allotted to them.
Biggie. And finally, you have been known to argue with another to establish the error or falsity of some thought of theirs, which I've never done.
Never, not in
Never.
a couple hours at least. So I feel like there's so much there. And do you want to just take one or two of them and expand on them a little bit? Because we can all certainly relate to so many of these. In the workshop, in fact, we had people check off which one applied to them. And I think a lot of people had all of them, essentially.
I kept hearing, I checked them all off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of interesting ones because we don't tend to identify these as forms of anger. Like, for instance, you've expected people to reciprocate once you've given them something. We don't think that's anger. But, what the Course says is that we think we resent having to give up that thing we gave to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so until they've reciprocated and we're still in that state of loss, of sacrifice, we're angry.
Yeah. And also, the first couple really drew my attention. That you don't like certain people, and there's people you'd rather not run into when you're out in public. So we all know if you don't like someone, that is a form of anger. But what I tend to do is I tend to say, okay, well, this person is not in my life anymore. And that's fine. They're over there and I'm over here, and I'm not recognizing that for what it is. If I don't want to have some kind of a healing with someone, that is anger. And so I tend to try and view it as, well, it's okay. People, we just had a difference of opinion on something, and they're living their life and I'm living mine. But if I'm not actively seeking that healing, there's anger in me.
Right. And I mean, who of us has not, hopefully there are some of us, but there may not be any of us who have not sort of seen someone in public, like at the grocery store is the classic thing. And you just manage to sort of cruise down a different aisle, once you see them. It's surprising to hear that that's anger. But even when you don't like someone, I don't think everyone realizes that's anger. You can just consider it a matter of taste. Like, I don't like broccoli. Do I think I'm angry at broccoli?
You are a little, actually. Having been out to dinner with you, you are a bit angry and disgusted with broccoli.
I do have anger at broccoli, but I don't consider the feeling it gives my taste buds to be my choice. And that's how I think a lot of us look at not liking someone. It's like they just rub us the wrong way. It's a matter of taste. So I don't think we have to consider that as anger, even though it really is anger.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. We just think, well, there's something about this person that I don't like, and we don't necessarily associate that with anger, although the Course most definitely would. Before we move on, there's one that always strikes a chord when we have our classes on this topic, and it's you want people in your life to feel appropriate guilt for what they did to you, and you want people in your life to be fully aware that your woundedness, your hurt, your trauma, your sickness, and your depression is the result of what they did. Now, I think we're all in touch with how that's anger, but we're not in touch with how much it's hurting us.
Yeah, and what the Course teaches is that there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. So when we feel the hurt or the depression as a result of what they did, what's really going on is we didn't have to feel that. We chose, on some level, we chose to let it in, to let, for instance, their negative view of us go in and hurt us. And the only reason we chose it was so that it would make them guilty. And we could then show our hurt to them as a way of punishing them. And, there's that great section that says, "Behold me, brother, at your hand I die." There, prior to anything they did, there was a desire in us to send that message, "Behold me, brother, at your hand I die." But to send it convincingly, we needed to let in the hurt from them that we didn't have to. We just wanted to.
Right. And part of the reason why we wanted to is because, as you're saying, we want to send that message. Like, we want to punish them for what it is that they've done to us. And so in order to do that, we have to remain hurt. And so we
Right.
have to let that hurt in. We have to submerge in that hurt, and we have to continually show them, look what you've done to me. And that's obviously a form of anger. That's obviously a form of attack and unforgiveness. But again, we don't see how much it hurts us too. So
Yeah.
all of these listed, all these reasons why we are angry, all these ways in which we show our anger, whether we're in touch with it or not, are important for us to realize this is actually going on in all of us, whether or not we
Right.
admit it or not.
It's a bigger issue for us. That's the point of the 11 signs. It's a bigger issue for us than we would generally recognize.
Right. So, what does the course actually say about anger? Can you just lay it out for us?
Yeah, to set the table for it, I'll say that the universal assumption is that something that happens causes anger in us. So person says something, an event doesn't go our way, and that like goes in us and causes this anger. And now we have the anger. And what do we do with it? You know, in the past, it was like, well, we're just supposed to like stuff it down, count to 10, right? Let it pass, whatever. And now it's like, well, there's this energy of anger that's been placed in us. We didn't place it there. It's like a natural urge, like hunger. And so it's not healthy to stuff it down. We've got to deal with it. We have to manage it. We have to do something with it. And what the course, where it starts is a disagreement with that view. Its view is that in between what happened out there and the anger we feel is this crucial middle term, and that is we interpret what happened. And it's the interpretation that is the actual cause of the anger. It's not the external event that causes the anger, it's our interpretation of that event that causes the anger. And so there's a great line in the Manual for Teachers that says, it is always an interpretation that gives rise to negative emotions. And once you have those two different bases, you know, the conventional view being the event causes the anger, the course's view being our interpretation of the event causes the anger, you have two different foundations, two different ways of going forward from there and dealing with the anger. It's a completely different view.
Mm-hmm. It always reminds me of being a mindful leadership trainer, which is what I did before I came to the circle. And in the presentations that I would give, I would always talk about this great tool called the ladder of inference. And at the very bottom is the facts of the situation, just actually what happened. And then as you go up the ladder, you're getting on shakier and shakier ground because you're adding layers and layers and layers of meaning to the facts. Oftentimes they're not there or they're not true. And so by the time you get to the top of the ladder, you're taking action, often very unwise action, as a result of the emotion that you've piled on top of facts. And so one thing that you said in the workshop that I thought was really powerful around this part is it's like if 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 you were standing observing the situation that has triggered you, if you were standing there observing the situation that made you angry, but you were standing with two or three other people, would they have the exact same interpretation of that event that you did? And if the answer is no, then there's probably something off, right? Because if something is true, it's universally true, meaning that it applies to everyone. And so if we can just get back below the meaning that we place on things, below the interpretation that we give things, just to the facts, then we're more able to get to what the course is asking us. We're more able to have, wise decisions and wise actions as a result.
That's true. But what the course is saying is even when you have the facts absolutely straight, objective facts, if you're angry, you've misinterpreted. Because what the Course is teaching is that we have brought to bear on that interpretation a whole false worldview. So even if, yeah, that person said that, and they said it for the reason you thought, and they had the motive you thought, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was going to have the effect on, let's say, your career that you thought. Even if you had all that absolutely correct, you were still interpreting it, if you were angry, you were still interpreting it on the basis of a false worldview. So from the Course's standpoint, no matter what, if you were angry, you were misinterpreting what happened,
But that's the layers that we place on the facts, right? So the facts could be something like Russia invaded Ukraine. That is just a fact. It doesn't have to make us angry. It often does, but it doesn't have to. And so the Course is just asking us to have a different baseline of reality. And I think that that's probably where you want to go with this. Like the Course wants us to start with a whole different view of what is quote unquote fact. So do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, and one of the things that helps me, going back to your thing of if people were standing next to you, and maybe you have people standing next to you who are saying, yeah, you should be angry, because a lot of times that happens. We can, either us along with the other people are affected similarly, or we convince them to be angry on our behalf. But what I like to imagine is, let's say, a truly illumined spiritual master like Jesus standing next to me. Is that person, even if they are receiving the mistreatment that I'm receiving, are they going to be angry? And if not, are they just naive, or are they more sane than I am? So that, I think, helps. So
the
what
old
the Course,
WWJD, what would Jesus do?
Right. Yeah. Or what would Jesus feel?
And it is.
AF?
It is. I mean, that's actually really helpful, because if you imagine Jesus beside you and you think, okay, how would he react to this situation? He's going to react totally differently. He's going to be like, it's fine, and we can respond to this with love and gentleness. Meanwhile, like if my mom was on the other side, it would be like, wait a second. I would so much rather have Jesus here. And so anyway, that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Right. And maybe he knows some things we don't know.
Maybe he does.
Yeah.
Maybe he does.
Yeah. So what the Course is saying is, if you were seeing from the framework of true reality, you would realize that even when the facts look bad, there is still no cause for anger. And that leads us to this well-known phrase among Course students, that anger is never justified. And the Course repeats that exact statement twice. But more interesting than that, because I've known that for years and years and years, is that 19 times the Course mentions some form of the word justify in connection with anger, always with the point being made directly or implicitly that anger is never justified. So when the Course, it often pairs justify and anger, and it's always making this point, it's never justified. So this is a huge theme regarding anger, if there are 19 occurrences of it. And I'll read a couple of examples. In the text in chapter 30, he says, anger is never justified. Attack has no foundation. It is here escape from fear begins and will be made complete. In the manual, he says, if anger comes from an interpretation and not a fact, it is never justified. In other words, even those facts have to be interpreted. And the real facts, if we knew the true nature of reality, the real facts would not justify anger.
So, okay, so if we take the ladder of inference, for example, and you have facts at the bottom, and then we're constantly putting our own meaning and interpretation and feelings on top of those facts. So in the Course's view, the very bottom of that ladder would be a completely different view of reality. And
Right. Like
so
it's a new set, an unseen set of facts.
right, like there's a truer truth beneath what your sense data is telling you, because your eyes and your ears are telling you that this person is a jerk, that they're intentionally trying to hurt you, that they need to be out of your life immediately, that they're dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. And there's obviously some reasons to get our bodies away from other
Right,
bodies,
right.
but at the same time, when you're able to look at situations and people, any situation and any person, from the standpoint of the only thing real in this situation is what God has created in it, like the truer truth of them, their true nature, and nothing else exists, then it's hard to be angry. And that's what
Well,
you're
the
saying,
course
right?
is saying is that if you really saw things clearly, it would be impossible to be angry. You wouldn't even have the temptation, the impulse. There'd be no pull towards anger at all.
Right. So part of why we get so angry is because we're only seeing what our physical senses tell us is true.
And then our ego is interpreting what those senses tell us. Yeah. But
And then, go ahead.
go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say that as we've done the workshop and taught this message, this point of anger is never justified was one of the big sticking points for people, right? Because you're always thinking of examples where it's just so hard to believe that could be true.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask you so in the workshop and in classes, and I'm sure there's so many who are listening right now, they're probably thinking, wait a second, I've had this situation of horrific abuse. We're all hearing about the absolute shocking and unspeakable things, the stories that are coming out of Ukraine. There are situations where it's like, wait a second, if we're not angry about this, then what is going to change?
Then we don't care.
If we're not angry, we don't care. And so it's anger that inspires us to not be complacent in the face of a world that's often extremely unfair. And so if we're not angry on behalf of the children, then who's going to protect them? So what's the course's response to that?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, and I think this came up in the workshop, imagine your child's in the street, okay? And to make it completely innocent, let's imagine that rather than a speeding car, a tree has toppled over in the wind, and you see the tree coming down on your child, okay? Now, you're not angry. It's just a tree falling over. Are you unmotivated? No, you are full of adrenaline, 100% motivated to get that child out from under that tree without any anger. So that's one thing I think the course would say. Well, something along those lines. And then the other thing is that it goes back to the cattle prod thing. Yeah, using a cattle prod can get you results, but what are all the results of using the cattle prod? What are all the results of causing change with anger? Are there not some very unpleasant byproducts that linger along with whatever physical change has been caused?
Well, yeah, if you use the equivalent of a cattle prod to get your children to fall in line, for example, or your spouse to fall in line, or your employees to fall in line, then yeah, they may do what you tell them to do, but behind your back, they're going to be complaining and disgruntled, and your relationship with them will be broken as a result of your anger. And so even though they're compliant on the behavioral level, the foundation of the relationship is just not there. It's completely broken.
And think about, it's pretty universally agreed that after World War I, the incredibly harsh and punitive consequences that were laid in the Treaty of Versailles on Germany set us up for World War II. So we thought we were just going to really stick it to Germany after World War I. And, we sent them into ultimately this horrific depression with the sanctions and so on. And what that did to German pride was basically lay the foundations for Nazism and then World War II. So how practical was it to express that anger in that form after World War I?
Right. And then after World War II, presumably we learned that lesson with the Marshall Plan and whatnot coming back in to rebuild. And I've always been super inspired by Lincoln after the Civil War, where he said, with charity towards all and malice towards none, we'll bind up our wounds. And so Lincoln was not in the business of punishing the South for the Civil War. And so there's just so much to learn there. And also, we've talked before about being an angry peacemaker. I mean, it's just such an oxymoron, isn't it? So if you want to go out in the world and really make change, to really act on behalf of social justice or whatnot, if you're angry, people will like kind of shut down. And so it's the gentleness, it's the love that really creates change. This is what we saw with Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. This is what we saw with Gandhi. This is what we've seen throughout history. It's an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. But if you really want to go out in the world and affect change, do it with real power, which is love and gentleness and peace.
Right. I just think that you can create a short-term change with anger, but I think you create the long-term change with love. I don't think the anger ends up being practical. Anyway, so one side of what the Course is saying is that anger is not justified. It's not actually in accord with reality. That interpretation that instills the anger in you doesn't mirror the real facts, the real nature of what's real here. So the other side of it is that it's harmful. And there's two sides of that, harmful to others and harmful to oneself. And the harmful to others, I think that's kind of obvious. Anger makes a statement that you are bad, you are sinful, you deserve to be hurt. You don't deserve love. You deserve what I'm giving you instead, anger. There's a great line in the Course that says, all anger is nothing more than an attempt to make someone feel guilty. Now, we don't think of anger that way, but that's what it does. Anger says, you're guilty, you should feel that way, and then you should do what I want to relieve that feeling of guilt. That's how anger gets results. It doesn't directly control people. It makes them feel guilty, so they're highly motivated to do what you want, to let you control them, so they can have relief of that guilt.
Oh God, there's so much there. I mean,
yeah.
If you're watching or listening and you're not moved by that idea, then it's the proverbial failure of introspection, because who hasn't, and I say failure of introspection because that's what Robert accused me of doing a couple of years ago.
It's just something I said.
Yeah, I was like, I don't really relate much to guilt, and your response was, I think that's just a failure of introspection. So that's become a phrase that we use. But who hasn't done this? Who hasn't tried to pile on the guilt in order to manipulate and control the behavior of others? And that's one of those things also that we don't really identify with. We don't couple it with anger, but the Course most definitely does. It's an attack on them.
Right. To try to make them feel guilty is anger, and anger is an attempt to make them feel guilty. And It's a great method of control, because no one likes to feel guilty. And so,
if you can make them feel guilty enough, I mean, it works.
It seems to work. And I think we probably can think of certain people for whom that's maybe the main way they get through life, but we all use it.
Yeah. But again, it goes back to, what is this costing you? And so whether you are trying to manipulate and control someone's behavior through outright aggression and attack, or overt attack, or
Hmm.
whether you're trying to control their behavior by showing them how hurt and wounded you are, it's still anger, and it's still costing you. Like it again, if they're, even if they behave and comply with the way that you want them to behave and comply, it's still, the foundation of your relationship is broken, because if your relationship is built on anger or guilt, there's just something wrong there.
Well, as you're talking, I'm thinking about these different kind of levels or examples of this concept, this principle. One is just where you're just outright guilting them, right? You're outright attacking them verbally. And then another level is where you're just showing them, no, sorry. Another level is where you're saying, you're not being overtly angry at them. You're just saying how much they've hurt you. Then
Mm-hmm.
another level is what the Salon of Prayer supplement calls the martyr, where you're not saying how much they've hurt you, you're just silently showing it. And then a final, and that's a good one, because then you don't seem so guilty by guilting them. You can guilt them in a more innocent way. And then a final level is where you give with strings attached, which we talked about earlier, where I'm giving to you and I kind of would rather not have to give this, sacrifice this thing, give it up. And so because you benefited from it, you're guilty until you in some way pay me back
Mm-hmm.
with love and thanks, effusive gratitude, or something else. And so there's all kinds of different ways in which we carry out this principle of using anger to instill guilt to control them.
Yeah. And that's where you get into like righteous anger. And we hear so much about that these days. Like, I deserve to be angry at this person because of what they've done. And so we feel very, very justified in holding that grievance against them. And from a course perspective, that grievance, that anger, holding that against them is never, ever justified. So,
Yeah, and what's strange is that, I mean, in our culture, the right is angry and the left is angry. Both sides are extremely angry at each other and seem to assume that if they can just like show the other side how ridiculous they are and win, then
mhm,
they'll emerge on top. But of course, that just energizes the other side. It makes the other side more angry.
mhm. Right. And it goes back to the whole eye for an eye makes the whole world blind thing. Like, if we
Yeah.
just continue to fight anger with anger, then we are going to end up with exactly what we have. This whole idea of there must be a better way. There must be a better way to heal the world. And the only thing that is truly healing is peace and love and gentleness. So
Yeah. Wait.
we
I'm not.
oh,
There's one last thing, and that
okay,
is
sorry.
anger. Anger hurts us.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that's really crucial for this whole thing, because even if it's not justified and hurts somebody else, we might think, well, it feels pretty good. And the course is teaching throughout that anger in one form or another is the main thing, the only thing that hurts us. There's this great line, this image in workbook lesson 192 that says, every time you feel a stab of anger, realize you hold a sword above your head and it will fall on you or be averted as you choose to be condemned or free, as you choose to be angry or not. Um, and it's a really vivid image. He wants us to think, when I feel a stab of anger, I'm actually holding a sword above my head. And if I give into the anger, it's going to fall on me,
Mhm.
which is a great image to use, because from the course's standpoint, being angry in one form or another is our whole problem. It causes all of the suffering we experience. We just don't think of the different forms as anger, but they are.
Yeah, I know you're really motivated and inspired by the sword image. I've always been more inspired by the jailer and the jailed, and the idea presented in the course that the jailer is no more free than the person that he's jailing. He's just
Hmm.
keeping in the prison of our grievance. So that idea has been really powerful. If I'm holding someone in jail, if I'm holding them, if I'm locking them up with my grievances and my guilt and the anger that I'm putting on them, then I have to hold that anger and that judgment and those grievances in order to let them know they're still in prison. And so I'm locked up with them too. Like they're bound by my judgment, and so am I. And
Yeah.
so that's to me is a really powerful example of how what we give to others is stuck in us as well.
Yeah. That's a great image. Really is.
Yeah. Okay. So where do you want to go from here? Do you want to?
Well, well, did you want to talk about our discomfort that we have with anger?
Well, I just feel like we may have already covered that, but at the same time,
I've got
I
a few
do.
things to say about it.
Okay. Well, I'll just say very quickly,
Yeah.
it's we somewhere inside we know that we're angry. I mean, we can put on the nice face, I live in the South, and one thing we say is bless your heart, and everybody knows what that means. Like everybody knows that bless your heart is code for like forget you or worse, right?
Right.
So we try and pretty up our anger and pretend that it's not there, and that the very fact that we do that shows how uncomfortable we are with it. So that's just what I would say. But
Well, I think there's, you know, we had in the workshop a whole list of sources or forms of discomfort over our anger.
we also had
But
4 hours.
yeah, but a few things I want to mention. One is that the Circle did a workshop on anger I think about 13, 14, 15 years ago. And what really surprised me is it seemed from what people were saying and sharing that no one who came to the workshop on anger had any anger left. Everyone just thought, yeah, so good to be done with that, you know,
I'm
which
spiritual
can't,
now.
yeah, which just shows, from my standpoint, from the course's standpoint, I think too, how uncomfortable we are with it. Another one that I hear, and I've heard for years and years, is that I'm only angry because of my fear, because I'm afraid.
Hmm.
And that's a way to make the anger seem way more innocent. I'm just afraid, right? And I think that is also an indication of the discomfort we have with facing that there's something in us that's
Okay.
destructive.
So you have to go into this because this is a perennial roundabout that we have in our classes. And in fact, there's a question in the chat that says, is hurt the same thing as anger? So we love to believe that our anger is just the result of our wounds. We love to believe that we're just acting out of fear because we've been hurt. And so the course does not take that view. So do you want to share what the course has to say about the relationship between hurt and anger?
Well, I think it's fear and anger and hurt and anger. I think they're a bit different. Well, we saw what the course says about hurt and anger. What we all want to say is the latest psychological wisdom is underneath the anger is the hurt. And that just lets us off the hook, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
Because
the
then the
course
anger is
is,
justified.
because then it's basically justified. It's just a reaction to a really sincere, I've been hurt. And the anger just kind of comes out of that, almost like it's a secondary byproduct, whereas the true, authentic emotion is the hurt. The anger just sort of gets thrown off, from that original cause. But what the course is saying is that no, you chose to be hurt. You didn't have to be hurt. You chose to be hurt so that you could punish that person, as we talked about just a bit ago. And the desire to punish that person, to say, behold me, brother, at your hand I die, and my hurt is the proof of that, that's an angry impulse. So the
Mhm.
Course, even if we can say beneath the anger is the hurt, the Course would say beneath the hurt is a much more ancient anger.
Yeah, and that's the thing too is the whole um, inner child and healing childhood wounds issue, and I don't want to throw a bunch of cold water on that because I have had inner child therapy work. I but the the course doesn't really have us go back to look at our childhood wounds that we consider to be the source of our hurt and therefore the source of our anger that causes us to behave more angrily in our life. And so how do we kind of reconcile this with what the course says about anger?
Good question. The Course does say, I mean, there's a whole section called the essential goal of therapy, as you know. It's in chapter 3 in the text, section 8. And it was originally directed at Bill and his view that, his resentment towards his parents not really valuing him,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the lingering hurt he felt over that. And at this point, he is like in his 40s, and he's still hurt and angry. And what it says is that, first of all, in the next section, it says that the child who takes in those views of the parent it's an act of will on the child's part. Now, most children are not in that much possession of their will to say, I'm not taking your lack of love in. So the big emphasis in the essential goal of therapy is on the fact that once you do gain more possession of your will as an adult, you can say, I am not going to keep their views of me. And you can realize that the reason you would retain them is to punish them,
Mm-hmm.
punish the parents. So from the Course's standpoint, the main thing is to claim the power of your mind to make a different interpretation of what happened.
Right. So once again, we don't have to let in that misinterpretation from our parents or anyone else. We don't have to let it in. Therefore, we don't have to be hurt by it. Therefore, we don't have to claim that we're hurt so that we can express our anger to the world.
And obviously, it can take a lot of work, a lot of mind training to really get at and change that interpretation. But
Yeah.
Jesus did not dispute the facts in the normal sense of the word facts. He did not dispute that Bill's parents, he didn't say, well, they just loved you like crazy, you didn't see it right. He basically implicitly acknowledged that their view of him, of his worth, was off. So
Mm-hmm.
he couldn't like change his view of what happened. He just needed to change his view of basically that he should let that in and let it determine his view of himself.
I just think
So
that's a
then, yeah,
really important. Sorry. No, did you?
no, I was going to try to change this over to the fear anger thing, but we're still on this. So go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to reiterate what an important teaching that is from the course because so much of why we believe that we're angry stems from why we believe that we're hurt. And the course is saying you don't have to let that in and therefore you don't have to be angry. So now you can talk
Yeah.
about fear.
Yeah, the fear thing, which I know we don't have a lot of time for given the lateness of the hour, but I think saying fear comes first is another way to not face our anger. It's like, I'm just afraid.
Hmm.
Fear is the expectation that I will be hurt. So saying that I'm angry because of my fear is not so different than saying I'm angry because of my hurt. And from the Course's standpoint, fear really is not the cause of it all. It's the result of it all. First, we get angry, then we feel guilty. All of our guilt comes from some form of anger. And then feeling guilty, we think we have it coming to us. And now we're afraid. And then once we're afraid, that fuels more anger. But the chain didn't start with the fear. The chain started with the anger. And I think this is a lot of the challenge of the Course in the age that we live in, where no one's going to say, because it sounds too much like original sin or something. No one's going to say to us, except the Course, that there's just something in you. There's a destructive, hostile, aggressive impulse in you that predates anything that was done to you. It's before all those provocations that you think provoked it and caused it. It's just in you, not how in terms of how God created you, but once we chose to separate not because we were afraid. We chose to separate as an aggressive impulse to be above our brothers and to even be above God. And once that choice happened, ever since then, a fundamentally destructive impulse has lived within us. It's not a sin, it's just a mistake. It hasn't done any real harm from the Course's standpoint, but we don't like the idea that it's in us unprovoked. That's a hard thing to face.
This is such a fascinating topic because you're right. It's so much easier for us to say, I am this way because of the way my mother treated me or the way my father treated me, than to say, and you get a lot of sympathy and attention for that. Because we've all kind of had, who hasn't had a difficult childhood in part, right? And so given that we can all kind of relate to these experiences, then we sit around and talk about them as why we're angry and afraid and hurt.
And it gives us a certain license.
Yeah, it gives us a certain license
Tell
to
the
act
story,
out like
and you get license.
I'm this way because so you not only get the head tilt where people are like, oh yeah, God, or yeah, me too. And so then you feel like in the group, right? No one gives you the head tilt when you're like, I just have this ancient hate in me. And
my parents were really nice.
I'm expressing this ancient hate and it's just like spilling all over the place in my life and in my relationships. You're going to get the other kind of head tilt of get me out of here. And so in a choice between those two options, you're going to, go towards the direction of the sympathy and empathy versus the ancient hate. And so the Course is just asking us to get in touch with that ancient hate. And for me, that it's a helpful teaching because once again, it impersonalizes the ego. We all have this kind of anger in us. And so the work is just to take a stand against it within ourselves. And so that to me is just a better use of the power of our mind than trying to stay stuck in the childhood wounds.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't have the horrific childhood that some people I know had, and there are people who had unbelievable childhoods.
Right.
And for those people, I would be reluctant to preach this teaching to them. It might not be what they need right now. At the same time, the Course thinks that you'll get more liberation from this teaching because it can instill in your mind the idea that I simply don't have to have any anger and I don't have to have any hurt over what happened. I can choose a different interpretation on both counts. And that is total liberation. The Course talks about that in relation to Bill, as Bill, in essence, claiming his own resurrection, like Jesus experienced. So the Course thinks that's more liberating. At the same time, I've known people with such horrific childhoods that I just feel like icky trying to
and
put this on them.
We don't put it on them. But yes, I'm with you. I've been with you in those classes where you have people who will come out and say, you don't know what my childhood was like. And so almost like, how dare you tell me to override it? And even the Course, it's tough. The Course even says that as children, we do have some kind of force of will in us. At the same time, no one is saying that a child has the mental capacity to override abusive parents. But certainly as adults, when we have more of our cognitive function online, when we have more freedom of choice, we can choose to take a stand against the anger and and those feelings of hurt that can really
Yeah.
plague us and keep us stuck for our life, stuck in grievance for our life. So it is liberating, as you're saying.
Yeah. So the big thing that we came to, and this is what you and I have been saying to each other ever since the workshop, almost on a daily basis. The big thing we came to is if anger is unjustified, meaning it's not in accord with reality, and if it's harmful to others and ourselves, harmful to all concerned, then the course quote is, anger is insane. But then I modified that, and I do have
And
to be
you're
fond
very
of.
proud of it.
Thank
You're very
you.
proud of your
I was
modification.
trying to add it before you did. So the quote is, anger is insane. Well, another word for anger is madness. And another word for insanity is madness. So the big distillation, which, I wish I had coined, is that madness is madness. So we keep joking, like, as everyone is saying, and like no one but us is saying it. But I like this saying because there's got to be some folk wisdom in the fact that madness is a word that's a synonym for anger and a synonym for insanity. There's some kind of recognition in the consciousness of the race that anger is madness.
I know we did this topic with a group of Spanish speaking course students recently, and Robert was very bummed that madness didn't translate the same way in Spanish. So it didn't work.
No.
And he was like, oh, this is the punchline of this whole thing.
But one nice thing about that workshop, which we've been happy about, is that crowd wasn't as infected with all the coolest contemporary wisdom. They were just like, my anger has been such a problem in my life. It's just caused destruction. I want to be free of it. Whereas we in the English speaking world are more into the cool, new, progressive ideas of how healthy it can be.
Right. It's like, I don't have anger, bless your heart.
Or
and you just know there's like seething underneath,
it's just, I've just got to be authentic with you and let you know how angry I am. But I'm expressing it in my best nonviolent language, and so it's absolutely fine and real and genuine.
Oh, yeah. Don't get me started on, I would be out of integrity if I didn't just lay it out and tear you to shreds.
Yeah. Anyway, I know we're out of time here.
Yeah, it looks like we are. But at the same time, I don't want to leave listeners without an actual practice for dispelling the anger when we feel it. And so how do you want to do this? I know we had a whole process in the workshop, but let's just distill it briefly.
Okay.
I think if you notice from your mood that you're angry and then you actively take a different view of what's going on, you can break it up. So
maybe I can go through it in a bit more detail. If that's okay. Just like a minute and a half version.
Sure.
Okay. So this is a process that I distilled from section 17 and 18 in the Manual for Teachers. So it's found in one place, and it's a great process. So number one, someone says or does something you see as objectionable. Number two, notice your anger, both looking for even the faintest hint of irritation in yourself, or notice it by its results. You and the other person feel a loss of peace, even if you look inside yourself and don't see anger. So you can notice it by its presence in yourself or by the result of loss of peace in the relationship. Number three, remember this is not what you want. Picture yourself holding a sword above your head. Number four, remember that your anger comes from an interpretation that's not true, and that he says that directly. Let him instantly realize that he has made an interpretation that is not true. Number five, and this is the key part, choose a new interpretation, lay down your sword. And we had come up with some lines to say, but there are hundreds of practices the course gives us to repeat that really have the effect of dispelling anger. There's tons and tons of things you can choose, workbook lessons, whatever. And the point about them is by repeating these statements, you are adopting the new view of reality in which anger makes no sense.
Hmm.
And
Right.
then
Sorry, go ahead.
And then number 6, ask the Holy Spirit what you can say that's truly helpful. So the idea is once your anger has abated from doing the practice, ask the Holy Spirit now what you can say that really is an expression of love rather than anger.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that part where it's like you recognize that the reason why you're angry is because you have put an interpretation on the situation that is not true. And so as course students, we love to say nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Well, if nothing real can be threatened, then there is nothing to be angry about, because the only thing that's true in the situation is what God created. And so therefore, if I just put my faith in that, then I know nothing else exists, then therefore there's nothing to be angry about. And so even if I'm going out in the world and I want to create that change, I'm creating it from the quiet center within and not the out of control anger that will ultimately work against my own goals anyway.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
Yeah.
And just one last thing, it sounds like we're just supposed to stuff the anger down. That's not at all what the Course is saying. The Course is saying, change the interpretation that really is the root of the anger. The very bottom level source of it is that interpretation. You change it, and there's nothing to stuff down anymore.
Right.
It takes a lot of work, but it can be done.
And he's asking us to go out in the world and be miracle workers. He's asking us to get involved. He's asking us to heal. And so he's not like, sit down and stuff your anger. It's just like, how are you going to go out in the world? Are you going to go out as that angry peacemaker? Because if that's the case, you can't help him in the healing of the world. You can't harm and help at the same time. But if you're going to go out there and do what he's asking you to do it from love and call upon God's strength. And then you will be real miracle workers in the world. So, Robert, I really hope that Madness is Madness takes off. I know that right now you are the only one saying it.
You say it.
I do say it. I know, but we're the only two who are saying it. But I will, I'll kind of brag on you a little bit, because you really have internalized this workshop, and whenever a situation becomes tense, you have developed more of a capacity to kind of stop and joke and say madness is madness, and it breaks the tension and creates a different result. And so this does work. This does work. And so one of the things from the workshop, I'll close with this. We've been really trying not to get angry at anything. And that's just really tough, because the brain wants to say, well, this is justifiable anger and this isn't. And so to just take that as a challenge to not get angry at anything and respond to with gentleness to everything. And that's really hard, but that's what the Course is asking us to do.
Not get angry by choosing a new interpretation.
Right. So, okay, this was really fun.
This was fun.
Yeah. So thanks to all who joined us live. If you'd like to be on the list and receive notifications for when Robert and I do these Exploring A Course in Miracles podcast live, please go to circleofa.org/events, and you'll find the sign up there. It's free. And so we hope that you'll join us on a future recording. Thanks for being here, and bye for now.